ZYXWVRT SRQPONM LKJIHGFEDCBA. Thank you. So I learned how to say the alphabet backwards in 1974. And a lot of things happened in 1974 that kind of changed who I am today, maybe a little bit. First thing that happened is that my parents, after trying for a very, very long time, got pregnant with their second kid. Now, I was an only child for 7 years, and that's a long time to be an only child. And I was not just an only child, I was a spoiled only child. So I was the first girl in about 30 years on my dad's side. We lived in a small town, we lived near my grandparents. So I was the kid that went and had lobster at 2 years old with my grandparents and their friends. I was that kid. I was also a smart kid. I was a creative kid. Most of my teachers didn't quite know what to do with me, so they basically kind of let me do my own thing. And that was great. And then in second grade, I met my teacher, who was no Mrs. McGowan, but her name was Mrs. Sandfield. And Mrs. Sandfield was, imagine a Catholic nun teacher, but Jewish. And that was Mrs. Sandfield. So Mrs. Sandfield was this very strict, discipline-based woman who, she was a rote and repetition teacher. You know, you just wrote things 1,000 times and said them back 1,000 times. And I wasn't used to that because most of my teachers from that point were, you know, it was the 70s. So they were all kind of hippie and touchy-feely and lovey. And Mrs. Sandfield was not like that. She was a disciplinarian. She would yell at you. She would smack a ruler on the desk if you talked when you weren't supposed to. She'd put you out in front of a corner and she would have you, you know, think about what you did. And she would, you know, have you write things on the chalkboard. She was that kind of woman. She was also the first person I ever met that was immune to my charm. Now, I was able to charm everybody from the time I was born until I was 7 years old. There were rarely people I met that I couldn't charm, but I could not charm Mrs. Sandfield. And Mrs. Sandfield also, she wanted everybody to fit into that same box. And she did her best to get everybody to fit into the same box, but I was not a fit into the box person. And I had a hard time with Mrs. Sandfield because she was somebody I never met that kind of person before. I never had to deal with, you know, adversity like that. And it blew my mind. I couldn't handle it. And around the same time my sister was born, so November of that year in second grade, my sister was born. So now my parents were spending all their time taking care of the baby, not paying attention to me. And I had this teacher who's a monster, and I was a mess, a complete mess. But one of the things that helped me out was there was a boy in my class who was a little bit slower than the rest of us. And I stopped kind of thinking about myself all the time, and I started thinking about him, like, what could I do to help him? So I'd sneak over to his desk and I'd help him. I'd help him pronounce a word, or I'd help him do a math problem. And pretty much every time I snuck over, I'd get caught by the teacher and she'd yell at me. And she'd be like, nope, you know, she'd cause some kind of punishment, but I'm like, it's for a just cause and I'm cool with it now. So it's fine. But, you know, I was having a lot of stress for a 7-year-old, and things at home, like I wasn't sleeping because the baby was crying all night, and I had this teacher that I couldn't stand, and she was trying to put me in a box, and I'm not a box girl. So I had a little bit of a meltdown. And one day, Mrs. Sandfield yelled at me, and I yelled back. Yeah. And I just went, this is not fair. It's not fair that you're not helping this boy, and it's not fair that you're not paying enough attention to him, and you're yelling at me all the time, and you're trying to make me into something I'm not. And I'm freaking out. This little 7-year-old is freaking out in the middle of her second grade classroom. And inside my head, I think that half of the problem was coming from the fact that my parents had had a second kid, and I'm not the only kid anymore, and I had no responsibility. And all of a sudden, I have responsibility for myself and a little baby. And it wasn't just about me. And when I got done having my fit, I expected Mrs. Sandfield to get mad. I expected her to send me to the principal's office or put me in the corner or whatever Mrs. Sandfield did. And she didn't. And she said to me, "Are you finished?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Do you feel better?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then she said, "Can I continue with my class now?" I was like, Okay. And that was pretty much the détente between Mrs. Sandfield and myself. So I'm glad that I had her as a teacher. And while I would prefer to not have her, in my life as a teacher at any other point, but at this point it was good because it got me to stop thinking about myself and start thinking about what I can do for other people and how I can stand up for other people. And I can stand up for myself, and I can, I don't need to be put in that box. And after a long, weird, circuitous career, I ended up getting a master's degree in education. And now I'm a teacher, like a corporate trainer, but I'm still a teacher. But I never, ever teach rote and repetition. It helped me figure out how to say the alphabet backwards, but that's where it ends. Thank you.